Hey, it's Pastor Doug, and I'm here to share with you another story. I continue to enjoy these. Hope that you do too. There's always a lot of good things to learn about the Lord and His ways, and sometimes it's just fun to hear a story that helps us grasp what God has revealed to us. This is a story about a time whenever the king was not real happy. You know about the king that lived out there where Jack and Will and Tom, his mom, and all his dad, everybody lived at, and why, he had them three girls that he was always a doting on, but man, he got upset with the littlest one of all one time. Why, she wasn't little anymore. She was already all grown up. Why, whenever he asked her to do something, she just wouldn't do it, at least not in the way he wanted her to do it, and he just getting upset. He'd tell her that, oh, you need to be down here for breakfast. And she'd get to breakfast, but she wouldn't get there on time. Oh, you need to eat everything on your plate. But she would just eat some of it. There are things she didn't like to eat, so she'd leave it behind. And he just grew frustrated and angry with her, and he decided that she just wasn't any good and that she just needed to be taught a lesson. And so he thought the best way that she could learn to appreciate what she had was to have everything taken away. And the way he was going to take it all away from her is he just sent her out to do on her own. He told her that she was going to have to go out and go into the woods, and she was just going to have to live there for a day and a week and a month. And if she got by and all that, then she could come back. But if he heard that she was getting up with anyone else, or if there's anybody helping her, why, he would not let her back. He was being unreasonable of a king, but it didn't matter. That poor girl just went off out into the woods. She was going out there and she was trying to do what her daddy said because she wanted to please him, but she just followed this trail. And it was a pretty wide trail, and then it became a pretty narrow trail. And then that narrow trail almost seemed like a game trail. And pretty soon you could hardly even tell that it was a trail at all. It was just sort of weaving this way and that way, and she was so distraught and depressed and not really caring, she just made her way in. And then, on the very edge, whenever it started getting the darkest in the forest, she noticed there was a little bit of a light, and she decided to go see what it was. And she got close to it, and it was an old rundown cabin. It was a cabin that didn't even look like it could hardly stand up. And she checked around, and while it did have a flicker of a light, it was because it seemed like the sun was a-coming over the ridges and bouncing off the edge of the bit of a broken glass it had in its front door, and that's what she'd been following. Didn't look like anybody had been there, and so she just went on in and made herself at home. Why, it didn't look like anybody had lived there in months and years, and so she decided she'd just stay there. Why, she cleaned it up a little bit and at least dusted it off a little bit, and then she decided she was so exhausted and so tired, she'd just lay down and go to sleep. And while she was asleeping, there came an old woman into that house. She woke up that girl, and whenever that girl saw what was going on, she knew exactly what had happened to her. She'd stumbled into the old witch's house, but she didn't know it was anybody's house. She tried to plead that she wasn't being there on purpose or reason, but witches aren't reasonable, and she had heard the rumor that that girl was out there in the woods by herself, and she cast a spell on her, and that spell made her start to look like a cat. Now, it didn't happen all at once. Well, the first couple of days, she just started getting pointy ears. And then she started getting out whiskers. And pretty soon, she started getting fur on her face. And it didn't take long until she was just starting to look like a cat. And then instead of looking like a full-size girl cat, each day she'd just shrink a little bit further and shrink a little bit further. And she was moving into looking just like a cat. Why, unbeknownst to all of these goings on, Jack and Will and Tom had decided to go out and seek their fortune. Why, they was going to go out into the wide world and see what they could see, go where they could go. Why, Will and Tom started a thinking about going, but that was about the time that they'd heard about Mr. Thompson and his twins, and so they decided they'd just stay behind and try to seek their fortune just right there in town. But Jack, he didn't have no qualms about going, and so he decided he would just go. He walked on into town, and he walked through town, and as he got out to the edge of town, the road went out in two different directions, and he didn't know which way to go. And so he decided he'd just decide by taking his hat and throwing it up in the air, and whichever way the wind let it hit the ground, closest to one side or the other, that's the way he'd go. But it didn't go on either one of them. In fact, it landed on a little bit of a game trail. Jack threw it up, and this time, thinking maybe he wanted to go to the right, he throwed it up that way. And it just floated right down and right back to the center. And then he throwed it up the other direction, and it floated right back down and back to the center. He throwed it out behind him toward town, and it floated right back and landed right there in that bit of a game trail. And so he decided that maybe that's the way he ought to go. And so he just put his hat back on, and off he went. And that little bit of a game trail led up this hollow and down another, and pretty soon it got to be an old game trail that didn't look like no game had been on it. There was twigs, and there was grass, and there was roots, and there was flowers, but he could kind of steal where it goes, and sure enough, it led him up into that same place where that girl had ended up. Why, Jack made his way up in there, and as he got closer to it, he could see that there was something going on. He said it was a little cabin, and it seemed like something was happening there, and so he just decided that he'd stay there tonight with whoever was living in it. And he just got there, and he started knocking on the door, and that old door looked like it swung open, and it was all dilapidated again, and there was everything going down. And he said, "Hey, is there anybody in the cabin at home? If you're in there, I don't want to startle you, and if you're not, I just might take advantage of this place and spend the night." And this great big cat, bigger than a house cat but smaller than a panther, had come walking out. It just sat down and looked up at Jack and said, "Oh, you don't want to be here." And Jack says, "Oh, law me, I found a place where cats can talk." And she said, "Oh, no, you didn't. I'm not a cat." He says, "Well, you look like a cat, and you don't talk like a cat, so I don't know what's going on there." He says, "Well, you're just going to have to find your way out." He says, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "You ought to get away from here." He goes, "I'm not getting away from here. I just found the most amazing thing I'd seen in my whole life, a talking cat." He says, "How'd you get that way if you're not a cat?" She says, "Oh, I've been here and I've had trouble. Went away from my daddy's house, and I ended up here, and a witch cast a spell on me, and every day I get more and more like a cat. And I imagine that she's going to show up here, and she's going to take me for her own when the whole thing's done. And there's nothing I can do about it." Jack says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Oh, because it's just the way it is." Jack says, "Well, I could help you. I'm here. What could I do to help you?" She says, "Oh, the witch comes in every night, and she checks to make sure her spell is a-working. The only way you could help me is to keep her out." He says, "Well, how can I help? What can I do?" He says, "Well, the first night when you stand up here, she's going to show up like all kinds of critters. She'll come in like a lion or a bear. She'll come in like a badger or a wolf. And she'll be trying to get in this door. And if she gets in this door, then I'm just going to have one more step to being a cat forever." Jack said, "Oh, that doesn't sound right." He says, "But it is the witch, so you don't got to be afraid of them. You just got to keep them from getting in the door." Jack said, "Okay, I can do that." And so he napped a little bit, and as he did, he just carved himself out a couple of big old clubs that he could use to keep any of them old animals out. And sure enough, during the night, he heard something a padding and a pawing, coming up to that door. Great big old bear. It lumbered up onto the steps, started coming up there, going into the house. Jack just gave it a big old whack on its nose, and it just shook around. He whacked it again and whacked it again, and then pretty soon that old bear wandered off. And then came in a panther, and he whacked on it. And then came in a wolf, and then came in a badger. And all night long, one big critter after another, but he didn't let none of them go through that door. And the next morning, when that girl come out, she was a little bit bigger instead of a little bit smaller. And she looked a little bit more like a girl and a little bit less like a cat. And that girl says, oh, you kept her awake tonight, but she'll come back tomorrow. She'll come back tomorrow night, and she'll be little critters, and it's going to be harder. She's going to be like a little squirrel, or she'll be like a little mouse. She might be like, a little chipmunk. They're all those little things, and they're fast, and they're hard. Jack says, oh, I had to keep them out of my house all days. I know how to do that. And so instead of big old clubs, he whittled him up some little old paddles and bats, and he got himself all ready for it. Made him 4 or 5 of them just in case he broke them on them. And so that night, whenever the first little mouse came around, he just swatted it away. And then there came a chipmunk, and a squirrel was coming over the side. He had to fight and swing and battled all night long, but he didn't let nothing get in that cabin. Why, the next morning when that girl come out, she was a little bit bigger, less of a cat and more like a girl. Why, and Jack said, I can start to see. I really can. I can tell this is a enchanted place. What do I do now? He says, oh, there's only one thing left. She'll come one more time, but she'll come as little bitty insects and ants and flying bugs and stuff, and she'll get in sure enough one way or another. I don't know how you can keep insects out of your house. And he says, oh, I can do that. And so he just carved him up some paddles and some swatters, and he just got himself all ready for it. And sure enough, when the night came, he heard the buzzing of a fly, and he flicked at it, and there came a mosquito, and there came an ant, and there came a little creepy crawler, and there came a worm, and he just had stuff coming all night long, but he stood there, and he swung, and he batted, and he swatted, and he said all the way through the night, nothing came in. And when the girl came out, you could tell she was a girl. She still had the pointed ears and the whiskers and a tail, but she was definitely a girl and not so much a cat. Jack says, oh, you're almost there, you're almost there. She says, oh, this time the witch is going to come in herself. And there's no way for you to keep her outside. She's just going to come right on in because this is her cabin to start with. So instead of trying to keep her out, you just need to come on in. But you can't let her help you do anything. If she can help you do anything, why, that's how she'll turn you into a cat too. That's how she got me. Jack said, I never heard of such a thing, but you can be sure I'm not going to let her take care of me, not in any way. So Jack just got himself back. He let himself up a fire in the fireplace, and he just waited for that old witch to come. And sure enough, by the light of a waxing moon, that old woman that looked like she must be 100 years old come a-creeping into the house and pointing her old finger right at Jack, saying, why, hello, Jack. He said, hello, ma'am. What can I do for you? She says, oh, nothing for me, nothing for me. I just need to get in here myself and see what's going on in my house. Why, you're my guest, and so I ought to be doing something for you. Here you already made a fire for yourself. Why, I'll just go over there and I'll put a little more wood in for you so you don't have to get up and stir yourself. Jack straightened up and says, oh, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. No, this is your house, and I ought to be helping you. I sure would. My mama didn't raise me to let no little old woman take care of me. No, sir. Why, you just sit yourself there, and I'll keep this fire going. And he had to keep his eye on her because she kept trying to grab something and get something in, but he wouldn't let her do it. Well, about that time, Jack decided that he ought to get himself a little something to eat. He says, "Oh, I was about to just scratch myself up some bread. I'll just make some for me and you too." And so Jack had just taken some flour he'd carried along with him, made him a little pone of bread, put it in a griddle, and just put it over on some coals in the fire. He was a poking around with it, and that old woman said, "Oh, law, Jack, it hates to see a boy like you trying to do a woman's work. Oh, no. Look at you. You don't even know how to roll up a pone of bread. That's not even going to be round. Why, you ought to let me do it. I've been doing it for years and days, and my bread is the best of all. Why, just let me get over there, and I'll touch it up and help you out." And she started to move over, and Jack said, "Oh, no, 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 no. My mama said I ought to be grateful for the things that are done for me, and no, I'm here in your house. No, I'll just take care of that, and I'll share it with you." And sure enough, he had to keep an elbow out and a foot out and keep that old witch away, and he finally got that bread cooked, and he shared it with her. And he said, "Oh, that was good." And so he just decided he'd hook him up some tea. And so he got a kettle on to boiling. And sure enough, she wanted to help. "Let me fix it for you. I got some good tea leaves here." But Jack wouldn't let her put hers into it. He'd carried some with him in his pocket, and he put it in. He had to keep her away. But finally, he just cooked it all up. And he served her some tea and got some for his own. And he just kept moving that way, helping that way, trying to do all that he could for her. And she just helped and said, "Oh, oh, oh. Now you eating and you drinking a little tea. You'll probably want to lay down. Let me go fix a little bed for you." And she started to walk over and put up a little thing. He says, "Oh, no, no, no. Why, I've been up these last 3 nights sleeping during the day. I think I'll just stay up all night. Why don't you just lay down in that bed that you've made for yourself? You just get right down there and sleep, and why, I'll stand guard at the door just in case there's anything out there that might be trying to come in and get you. I don't want anything coming in here and disturbing such a nice lady like yourself. No, sirree, no sleeping for me tonight." Why, that old witch just said, "Oh, well, I guess that's so, but why, it looks like the fire's dimmed a little bit. I'm just going to throw a little bit on there so that you can stay warm while you're keeping the door safe out there." And she started to walk over, and Jack ran around so she wouldn't get in there, and she started fighting and pushing and biting and trying to get to a stick to throw it in, and they just went tumbling and rolling and throwing, and before Jack realized it, he just rolled right over, and he tossed that witch right into the fire. Oh, Jack couldn't believe it. He'd never seen anything like it. He started to jump in and tried to grab her and pull her out and get her in. Why, she had some of her hair was a burning up, and her little dress was a bruised a little bit, and Jack got her out, and he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me help you. Let me help you. Let me help you." And so he just started to helping that witch one way and another. Why, he just did everything he could to get her better, and as he did, that old witch just straightened all out. And she said, "Oh, you've helped me more than anyone could ever help anyone. Even when you hurt me, you helped me. Even when you knew I was causing you harm, you helped me. And that's the least that I can stand. And so I'll have to just go somewhere else where I can get someone else." And Jack says, "Oh, if that's the way you're going to be about it, you just get on out of here and get on your way. But if I can help you, I would. Do you need to help me pack you up something?" She goes, "Oh, no, you just quit helping me. Maybe I need to take and fold up your clothes and put them in your bag. No, no, no. Maybe I need to get your broom all ready so you can get away." And she says, "Oh," and she got so upset, and she just got herself and flew out of there. And once she was gone, her spells began to break. And that girl come a-walking out from the dark shadows, the most beautiful girl that Jack had ever seen. And whenever they looked around in that old cabin, why, it had just sort of come back into a beautiful shape. All the wood was new, and all the doors were old, and all the glass was completely unbroken. And they stepped outside and looked around, and the garden was back where it had grown with things ready to harvest. And the barn was back in shape, and there was cows and chickens, and Jack couldn't believe it. And that little girl said, "Oh, I can't believe it true either. Why, who knew that that witch was so strong? And you drove her away with kindness, what you did. Oh, why, Jack, I guess since she's gone, that this place is yours." And Jack just looked at her and he says, "Well, I think it might be yours." And she says, "Well, it could be ours." And that's when she revealed that she had been the king's daughter that Jack had met on and off throughout their days. And they made a pact right there that they would go and live in that place together when they got a little bit older and they was ready for marrying. But until then, they would go back to the king and they'd go back to his family, but they would stay together and plan for themselves a life in the future. And that's exactly what they did, but that's another story. Now, I tell you that because sometimes we can want to do the right thing, but Satan can do his best to try to tempt us away from doing what is right. And what he will do is just sounds good, just like that time that he was tempting Jesus when Jesus was out in the wilderness. Tried to get him to fall for the temptation of the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh and the pride of life. But Jesus just showed his faithfulness to God and his willingness to follow God and him alone. And as that helped Jesus get through, following a good word and being faithful to what is true will help you as well. And that's the end of that.